Hi, this is JR. This piece is called Content, Context, and Circumstance. It's about three possible priorities and a framework for identifying where to focus when, such as now. So at any given time, I might focus briefly or for an extended period of time on some element of the physical content of my own body, my physiology, my health. I might focus on the context in language that I create through my speaking and interacting and perhaps writing, whatever. I don't even have to share it with other people how I even think. What I read when I read something, what I expose myself to in terms of information, mass media, sound, energy, whatever I expose myself to, but that starts to get into our surroundings and our circumstances. But we do have a choice as to the language that we use and the language that we expose ourselves to. How else would I put this? The language that we choose to cultivate in terms of the kind of conversations that we choose to cultivate. That would be context. How we label reality, how we relate to reality, how we identify ourselves and all the rest of reality. Circumstances of our life would include things that are around us. Circumstance means standing around. Circumstance. So the things that are around. It could be the furniture in my room, the neighborhood, the economy, the ecology of the planet, weather. So the process here is to clarify the framework that's possible for selecting how to focus. It can be a conscious process. It can use some unconscious signals, but it can be a conscious process of let's look for some of the possible things to focus on as a priority. And obviously, given that I'm talking here and we're using language, we're suggesting that context is pretty important, could be pretty important at least. Now there are times when the tangible content of my life could be a lot more important than the language I'm using, than the context and language that I create. For instance, in a medical emergency, we're not too concerned with words. We're more interested in breathing and ending the choking and stopping the blood flow and those kind of things. So a paramedic health crisis situation would be a really, really high priority. So if there's an issue on that level of physicality, then it's going to be a priority over most anything else, generally speaking, right? So content, the tangible content of my life, content means internal, inside some boundary, like inside my skin, or everything from my skin and on in, the bones, the digestive tract, the immune system, all the organs, the alignment of the bones too, the limbs and the muscular strength and coordination. Or is there a bunch of muscular tension? Is there crystallized lactic acid inhibiting motion throughout the body? Are there salt and calcium deposits in the joints that are painfully arthritic and limiting motion? So what's the balance of all the different minerals such as calcium? What's the biochemical condition of me, of my body? Now, when we use the word me, a lot of times we do mean my body. Like if I say, don't touch me, I mean don't touch my body, right? If I'm driving a vehicle and someone almost collides with the vehicle, I say, they almost hit me, or something like that. And that is a reference to an extension of the physical body, in this case, automobile, like a car or truck or something. And how we use the word me can vary. But when using the language me, we often are referring to my body, my physiology, my reality that I can't really leave. Right? I can move to a different room, I can move to a different country potentially, but I'm going to take my body with me, right? So that's core. And if there's an issue in terms of a possibility of improving the function and health of the body, or an urgent crisis in regard to the function of the body, that can be a really high priority. So I want to just take a moment, or a few moments here, to give attention to the fact that the body is extremely important. It can be a priority in terms of making some alteration in how I'm treating my body, or how I'm living in regard to my physiological life in my body, without reference to society or ecology external to me. There's the internal ecology of the body. So context, I put a little green line around my body. It changes it frames the occurring or experience of the body. We could even say it changes the experience of the body. And certainly words can relax us, can cause distress. Certain news at some point will cause you laughter. Oh, I thought I was really worried about that. Now I realize it's not really a concern anymore, and there's a physical relaxation. Emotions are physical, like laughing is physical, weeping is physical, sighing of relief. All of that is physical. And they involve all of those physical motions and movements involve what we call emotion. So the context in language is what I say. It could be what I write, like in a journal, that would also count. What I say, like what I say about me, about my identity, who I am, how I'm not. What I say about my self-concept. So I'm going to note here that when we fill up the whole, I'm filling up the whole body there with you can follow along with the images. There's the light green, almost lime color there inside the circle. When I'm not so oriented with what I'm not like and avoiding any particular persona or identity or quality or characteristic, when I'm open to the fullness of myself, that's integrity. So I'm not repressing fear or anger or sadness. That's integrity. I'm not suppressing my immune system physiologically. That also has to do with integrity. Now, it may be that I want to take a cough suppressant at some time, but I'm realizing that if I suppress my immune system's function, my healing process, that it could produce a more severe detoxification at a later time, like sweating and a fever or vomiting. If I suppress my body cleaning itself out in terms of coughing, for instance, or if I take antihistamines to suppress the hormones in the immune system that produces histamines, sometimes there can be overreactions by the immune system based on some really out of balance state. So if we're not addressing that underlying out of balance state, then antihistamines can actually be a good thing to use to prevent a complete, like toxic reaction to a bee allergy when there's a bee sting. So antihistamines are absolutely valuable, but they're also distinct from actually supporting the fullness of the functionality of the body. So if we're suppressing the immune system, that's going to be a very different thing than nourishing the immune system, nourishing the organs in regard to emotions and physical relaxation, as distinct from tension and distress and disturbance. we can explore what is the value of, and even the source of anger. What's the value of anger? What's the source of anger? How is anger distinct from resentment? How is it related to resentment? How is it related to blame, rage, aggression, animosity, frustration, disappointment, fear, terror, paranoia, hysteria? Anger can be compared, or rage certainly can be compared to hysteria. So we use terms like madness to describe mental illness. These are physiological patterns, neurologies involved in mental illness. So we can talk about our emotions like some of them are okay and some of them are dangerous, and they may be dangerous. Of course, there may be times when it's really appropriate that life causes a suppressing or refining or restricting of the expression of certain emotions that may be favorable to survival. However, let's look back at this issue of integrity. We mentioned integrity as it relates to being supportive of the immune system, being open to the value of all emotional states and all qualities of persona and character. There's also the way that we think about things like illness. Is illness a response, or is it an invader? Is it a demon possessing us, like diabetes or cancer? So am I possessed by a vitamin C deficiency or possessed by scurvy? Do I need to fight the invader, scurvy? Or is a vitamin C deficiency really not a presence of something and simply a condition that can lead to symptoms, and those symptoms can be labeled as if there's a presence of something, like baldness. We can consider baldness a presence of something, but it's an absence of hair. We don't call an egg bald because it has no hair on it, like a chicken egg. They're not supposed to have hair, so we don't call them bald when they have no hair. But the loss of hair, or never having hair in a place where we might expect hair, we call baldness. Well, if there's no vitamin C in a body, it's going to have consequences. But the absence of vitamin C isn't the presence of scurvy. Scurvy is just a diagnostic label. Cancer, just a diagnostic label. It's used in reference to a deficiency of B17, which tends to correspond to the accumulation of waste material in tumors. But the lack of functionality of the immune system isn't the presence of something. There may be a tumor, but it's like saying, well, I'm possessed by the demon of no garbage collectors. My immune system isn't removing toxins, it's just accumulating them. My garbage collectors aren't emptying the trash can at the curb of the street there. But that's not the presence of scurvy or cancer or, pellagra or whatever. It's not the presence of something when the garbage collectors aren't coming and taking out the trash. And if it builds up and piles up into a tumor or whatever we might label it, the diagnostic label is distinct from the physiological process and the absence of certain functionality in certain organs. In the case of diabetes, you add a whole bunch of sugar and don't have a healthy pancreas, then you have insulin imbalances. And we can call that the presence of diabetes. It's more like the natural consequences of eating way too many carbohydrates and not nourishing the pancreas to be able to process all of that carbohydrate. One time I was quite young, and it was Halloween, and I got Halloween candy, and I ate one evening of Halloween. And I ate all of my candy that evening, and I was sick. My stomach felt very painful. And people who consume a huge amount of candy or a huge amount of alcohol, they're going to have toxic responses to that, potentially. So somebody who vomits in response to being extremely drunk. The vomiting is the healing process. So when somebody is sick, because of toxicity, maybe they have some pollution in their air or in their water or in their food that their body is ready to remove, well, they can vomit. Vomiting isn't a sign of the being possessed by the demon of cancer or pregnancy or something. If somebody vomits during pregnancy because there were already toxins in the body that the body is now urgently removing. Before, there wasn't as much urgency because there wasn't a fertilized egg cell of pregnancy. But when there is pregnancy, then the body may really get active in regard to cleaning stuff out. So how we think about and talk about our physiology and our body does make a difference. Some of us study it, some of us study nutrition, and some of us just, study nutrition for 3 hours out of a public school book or something, and other people may study for 15 minutes study nutrition that's presented by somebody who really understands nutrition, has done a lot of research, and has great results. And in 15 minutes they can say a lot more valuable information than 3 hours of some kind of public school presentation, potentially. Not that public schools need to be less useful, but typically they miss a lot of important points and present a lot of information that I consider detrimental to the health of the people who would follow those recommendations. So, what I say about me, my body, my immune system, the processes of my body, like emotions, like detoxification processes, elimination processes, like sweating, even extreme things like coughing and vomiting. How I relate to them involves language. So that's context that I put around my physiological condition. So the context that I put around my physiological condition informs the actions that I will take, which then produce alterations to that physiological condition. If I eat differently, or if I study different perspectives in relation to medicine and health, or if I go to a different practitioner. If I go to somebody who says that's incurable, then I can't expect a lot of results from them. They're telling me that they're ignorant in regard to the physiological process, the science behind some condition. So if somebody says scurvy is incurable, that means they don't know how to cure it, right? If somebody else says, oh, scurvy, there's really no such thing, it's not a demon possessing you, it's a vitamin C deficiency, it's relatively simple to address, and it may be that you're in advanced stages and you really need some intense changes, and if you don't make those changes, it's going to be pretty serious consequences. It already might be. And the same thing is true of cancer or diabetes or any baldness, except baldness doesn't kill people, but we use terms like cancer killed me. Well, cancer doesn't kill people. The toxins that build up within the body, if not removed, can be labeled cancer, but that's the absence of the functionality of certain organs, the lack of nourishment that corresponds to the presence of all that toxicity and waste. Because even if somebody is nourishing themselves relatively well, if they've got a lot of toxicity, they need to give the body the resources to remove those things so that those things don't become poisonous. And so it's not unreasonable to say there's a cancer poisoning me, but it is also useful to say there are toxins within my body, there's waste within my body. Unless I nourish my body with vitamins and minerals and so forth, with healthy fats and healthy proteins and so on, unless I nourish my body, it's not going to work too well. It's kind of like saying my car is possessed by an empty fuel tank. No, there's a fuel tank and there's no fuel in it. And if you add the right fuel,
It's not that your car is possessed by an empty fuel tank. It's that the right fuel, the right nourishment, produces certain results within a car or within a physical body. So it is potentially of great importance or even a priority to explore physiological functionality and the principles of physiology. However, it's not always important. It's going to be important at different times in different ways. So context of language is not just about what I say about my body, not just about what I say about me and say, oh, I'm not shy, or I am shy, I'm not courageous, or whatever. If one can be open to the fullness of not being everything and being everything, any particular quality, I am open-minded and I'm not open-minded. Somebody who can fully appreciate kind of the humor of that kind of a irony or paradox, that's getting into integrity, and that's getting into how we can relate to the rest of our lives, the external circumstances from the desk and the room around me to economy, ecology, politics, and so forth. So what I say about me in relation to my life is still language, it's still context. So introspection and comments about language can lead us to new experiences and new ways of labeling the circumstances that I call my life, the things that I say are not me. Those people, the weather, those would be circumstances. Here's a list of circumstances. Weather, my home, meaning where I live, like what location geographically, as well as the physical arrangement of my home. If the refrigerator is empty or if it's dirty or whatever, that's all elements of home. My schedule, how I use my time. Everyone has a certain amount of influence on their schedule and probably a certain amount of momentum that's outside of their influence. Circumstances include finances, like how we spend money, how much money there is coming in, going out, other economic issues in terms of if someone's gardening and if they are watering the garden and so on. Job or career is a circumstance. My family would be a circumstance, like if I have a sister 3 years older than me or 4 years older than me, that's something I can't really change. It's just a circumstance. And if some family member dies, there's nothing for me to do about that. So those are circumstances that are not necessarily in my control. But how I label them and how I relate to them, including the actual people, if it's family members, how I relate to those people and how I interact with them, that is within my control. Back to context. The language I use about them and the language I use with them in the case of other specific people, that can make a big difference. Another circumstance would be my nation or my state that I live in, the conditions of the nation, the conditions of the state. I don't have a lot of influence over that, though. I'm one of millions of possible influencers, and I don't have a whole lot of political connection or financial clout to alter the nation, but it may be that at a time it is a priority to focus on altering the circumstance of the condition of the nation. How about the media? I don't have much influence over the media. How about culture in general? Just don't have much influence. The sport team that I like, I can't change who they start as quarterback. I don't have any influence over that. So for me to give a lot of attention and conversation to those subjects may not be as valuable, may not be a priority to me at certain times. While it may have been a priority at other times, it certainly could be. It could be how people invest their attention and energy. Ecology, like the ecology of the planet. Again, we just don't have, as individuals, a lot of influence over that. I can't change the weather. I can open the window, but I can't change the weather. I can relocate to a different state. I can take a vacation, but can't really change the weather. Can't change the ecology of the planet. Is the whole globe warming? Well, if so, that's an issue that's kind of beyond the influence of me as an individual. Kind of like voting for a national election. Just not a lot of return or reward on all the time I might put into that. So people might get frustrated or exhausted if they do put a lot of time into those things. How about the economy, another circumstance? Well, again, I might, if I start a business, it could influence my local economy, especially if it's a very small town. And if it's a big business within a small town, that can influence the economy. But otherwise, I don't have a lot of influence personally over the global economy, over the national economy, the economy of the state in which I live. If I live in Alaska, it's an oil-rich state, and that's just a fact. If I live in a state like Arizona, it's an energy-poor state that doesn't have a lot of local sources of energy, and the desert heat in the summer uses a huge amount of energy, and sprawling desert metros like Las Vegas and Phoenix, Greater Phoenix, people have long commutes and 110-degree weathers with their air conditioning cranking in their cars, so there's a lot of sensitivity in those areas to energy prices. Those are things that are outside of my influence. I can't change the fact that Arizona is different from Alaska, that Arizona or Nevada has had huge declines in economic growth in recent years, while Alaska, at the same time, benefited from fuel prices surging, doubling, tripling, quadrupling in the case of oil. In the case of gasoline, it only went up a couple 100% over the last 10 years or so, 15 years, but oil went up 1,200%. I can't change that personally. If oil continues to go up or if it goes down, I can't really change that personally. So these are things that I can be clear about. I can alter my relation to things. I can learn more and more precision about physiology or economy or politics or the weather or my financial alternatives, the legal system. I can really be present or attentive to the condition of my home. So there's a variety of areas in which I can focus, in which I might give attention as a priority. And language is important always. The context here down in the black at the bottom right, context is how I relate to or label my life and me, my body, my circumstances, my identity, my persona, how I am, how I'm not. All of that arises in language. And the neat thing about things that arise in language is I have immediate access to alter those things substantially. What I've done in the past as a condition of how I talk is really easy to alter, potentially. For me to say I resent that person, or for me to say, well, I disagreed with them. Those are both really easy things to say. It's easy to say them both, or just one or the other, or neither of the two. I can stop saying something so easily. All I have to do is stop doing it. Kind of like how you stop sitting down. Well, stand up. You can lay down. Just don't stay sitting down. So how do you stop complaining about something? Be quiet, or talk about something else. To stop complaining about something is incredibly easy, potentially, because it just occurs in language. Now there's neurology and momentum of the people around me and my social peer pressure and all that kind of stuff, but potentially language is really easy to alter, to reflect on, to introspect about, and to appreciate the value of it, the possible priority of it. So there's three possible priorities. Altering my content, like my physiology, my body, altering my context, like my language and how I relate to things, and then altering some specific element of my circumstances. It could be my schedule, my job or my career, my budget or finances, my location, the arrangement of my household, the organization of files and folders on the computer or in the drawer. Those are things I have tremendous influence over, and they're in my circumstances, whether they're my immediate circumstances or something like my schedule. It occurs in language. Schedule isn't a physical something, right? It has to do with what I say about myself and how I converse and interact with other people in regard to planning with them or planning on my own. So, the red there is focusing on me, my body, my biochemical nutrition, my alignment of my bones, the health of my organs and limbs, any of those kinds of things. In black there, focusing on my language, the context that I create in language for my life, for me, how I identify myself. Am I operating in integrity with an openness to all aspects of myself and all aspects of life, all of my circumstances? Or am I avoiding certain circumstances? Am I avoiding certain emotions? Do I want to avoid being clear about certain circumstances so as to avoid fear? If so, that could be adaptive or functional, but it also would restrict what I'm calling integrity, which is wholeness, health. If you look up the origin of the word integrity, you'll find wholeness, health, holiness. All of those words are connected. The brown there is pointing to circumstances. It could be a priority to focus on, again, schedule, finances, even things like influencing the economy or the politics of my local city, government, or my nation. The bigger the subject matter is as far as trying to influence the weather, well, it's possible. Somebody can do the science and get the airplane and fly over the clouds and drop some chemicals into the clouds and cause those clouds to rain. There is such a thing as influencing the weather. But the average individual, it's just not a priority for them. They don't have the capacity to do it. Economically, not a priority. So, amongst circumstances, I crossed out weather, crossed out family. You can't really change the weather much. You can't change the fact of being in the middle of 3 children. Cross out a bunch of others. It's really not easy to change the nation. There's just a lot of momentum and influence that it may be exciting to talk about changing the nation and what if it were to change in certain ways. So it could be a priority. It could be a social enjoyment. We might joke about the nation. We might be clear about the reality of the nation. That could be a priority, just to be clear about something. But if I'm relating to something as how it is, I have a different orientation than if I'm relating to something in terms of how it should be or how it could be. And if I relate to something in relation to how it should be, and then I'm eager to fix it or even anxious and desperate to alter something into some ideal of how it should be, whether it's my body or my language or my nation or whatever circumstance, that idealistic orientation, beginning with how it should be, is a natural setup for disappointment, frustration, exhaustion, and ultimately introspection, because that's what people will be pointed to through operating from idealism. They will come to recognize the value of language and introspection and being clear about the reality of things as a priority over my opinions that I might have inherited through propaganda as to how things should be, government propaganda, public schools, through the media, through churches, and so forth. Those institutions may be very valuable and functional in terms of directing people's attention and perception and getting them to focus on living in conflict with reality, trying to identify what's wrong and fix it so that people can earn their way into an alleged heaven that's eternal but just hasn't started yet, and all sorts of ironies that upon introspection we might find to be sad or even funny. So in addition to the nation, what else? Cross out the media. Can't change them very well. The culture can't change it very well. One at a time we can have conversations with people. We can publish a book maybe, but hard to change culture. Ecology, hard to change. Economy, again, my local economy, if I live in a small area and I'm quite wealthy, I could probably change the local economy. Maybe I could even influence politics in the local government. I have a lot of money, a lot of connections in this very small area. Otherwise, it takes a lot of energy and attention and resources and time to make big changes to large-scale circumstances. So I might focus on my body first, especially if there's medical crises. I might focus on my language. I might focus on some of the immediate circumstances like my household, my schedule, and consider reducing my investment of time and energy on subject matter that I might find exhausting or frustrating or even disturbing and frightening. So if I'm studying something that repeatedly frightens me, I might choose to do that less or gradually. Because being in a state of fear or stress can reduce my body's physiological functionality, can reduce my effectiveness and my enjoyment in regard to my schedule. And it could distract me from introspection and reviewing what's possible with regard to my language and the context I create in my speaking and even in writing. Again, could be a journal. So I have choice. I have a variety of priorities that are going to shift. At a moment I have to use the restroom and I had kidney stones. It was a priority. Everything else was set aside when I was passing kidney stones. It was extremely painful, kind of like delivering a baby during pregnancy. Look, other things will be set aside. If this doesn't go well, nothing else is going to matter much. If you're choking, if you're bleeding severely, paramedics can help you with that. If they do weird things and give you antibiotics and all sorts of stuff that's really extreme, do surgery and cut into your body, well, look, if your life is saved by that kind of intervention, great. But if you want to support your health, nutrition, energy medicine, chiropractic, there's an osteopath, naturopath. There's just a huge variety of health promoting practices, as well as a huge variety of remedial practices, like most of conventional Western medicine is very remedial oriented. Well, those can be valuable. They're also commercially potentially extremely lucrative. So if someone wants to make enormous amounts of money, they might become a cosmetic surgeon, or they might become a cancer physician and not cure people, have them come year after year for expensive treatments. Psychiatrists, if they have someone come and see them for 5 years or 15 years, that can be quite lucrative. Someone else might have a remarkable improvement in their health very quickly. Just not very lucrative for the service provider, right? So, different people will have different priorities at different times. When you were 3 years old, or 15 years old, or 28 years old, you have different priorities. If you're older than that now, you can reflect back and notice that you've had different priorities. Even 15 minutes ago or 15 days ago, you didn't have the same priorities you have now. Priorities can change, and they do. So, I did circle there in red some of the circumstances that are more easily changed. My schedule, my job or career, my budget, my finances, in terms of how I spend money in particular. My location, I could add my household and the arrangement of things like furniture, decoration of my house, easy for me to change. Other things, not so easy, but could be valuable. There are times when people have a lot of functionality in their physical body. They have introspected quite a bit. They're very clear about language. They may have some real stability in their finances and so forth. And then they get into issues like, how can we influence culture or the economy or the media or the weather? People eventually might get into very big scale issues and put a lot of time into that. But that doesn't mean they're going to stop being attentive to physical health. It doesn't mean they're going to ignore it if they get pregnant. Right? So these are just some different priorities. Consider what priority is most valuable now, and ongoingly be considerate of that question. Not with urgency necessarily, just with openness and curiosity. It may be that relaxing is all that there is, that's the most relevant thing to do, is simply to relax. It may be that certain actions that are urgent and require attention, or attention to them will naturally arise and will be very valuable. Lots of different priorities are possible. And integrity in one's life would mean that all the different possible priorities would have some tension within one's life, or might. So we don't have to say, I will not ever watch a horror movie, or read a book, or visit Arkansas. We don't have to list all the things that aren't priorities that we won't do. Integrity does not require inhibitions and suppressions and those kind of reverse psychology points of focus, because that really is a point of focus when I condemn something, I'm really putting a lot of energy into focusing on that thing, right? If I have contempt for something, if I'm resisting something, if I ridicule something, that involves a lot of attention. What I give attention to, I may cultivate, I may develop as a point of clarity, at least to be clear about the nature of that thing. If I'm studying it, I'm talking about it a lot. Am I open to studying my language, my body, my life, my circumstances? How am I open to those things? So, those are the questions that I have raised. Feel free to explore them as you wish.